We know what the Colts need now, but what needs might they have this time next year that they might actually address in this year's draft? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a bit of a competitive side, which is a big fan of Monopoly Go. It's the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly that we all know and love. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. What up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of horseshoehuddle.com. And guess what? We're a week out from the draft, so we're talking draft today again. Trying to put a little bit of a spin on it, though, because we've all been talking for months now about addressing what the Colts need, which we know they'll do in some spots over the 3-day extravaganza. But we also know that they're going to do a couple things where you're like, they maybe didn't need that right now. But these things we're talking about today are forward thinking and forward planning moves. Like they may not need them right now, but there's going to be a lot of free agents for them next year, just like there was this year. And they're going to have to perhaps draft some guys this year to prepare for players they may lose next year. And as we know, rookies aren't always tailor-made to start and be really productive right away. So they may want to get a year ahead of it. Today, we're going to look specifically at the linebacker position, tight end, and interior offensive line. We're going to go over why they might need those positions in the future, maybe how early we're willing to, or we think we would be willing to pick a player at that position and which guys fit that best. So first up at linebacker, this one's really interesting for me, Zach, because you have Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed, and there's some really standout duos at linebacker across the league, but Zaire and EJ have their sights set on number one. Like they're already one of the better linebacker duos in the league, but they want to be the best one. And I think by the end of the year, if both of them are healthy, they'll pretty safely be among like the top 5 best linebacker groups. But you've got EJ Speed ready to hit free agency after the season. And then basically all of their depth that we're used to seeing. Segun Olubi, Cam McGrone, and Grant Stewart, all of whom are also special teams contributors. So this whole group could look vastly different just if everyone were to leave in free agency, which makes it a bit of a priority if we're thinking forward to next year.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the Colts have quite a few needs for this year coming into the draft. Ideally, you don't want that, but again, we've talked enough about that this entire offseason here, so we don't want to spend any more time on that. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking forward, I do think linebacker is one of the more important needs here because I don't know about you guys, but when I think of EJ Speed, my brain thinks he's younger than what he is. I believe he's like 29 or 30 right now. You can look it up, Jake, while I'm talking here, but I want to say he's nearing his age 30 season. And, that's kind of when linebackers start to fall off. Even the best that we've ever seen linebackers start to fall off around that age. So again, we would love EJ Speed to be back. We'd love to see an extension after this upcoming season, but we have to be realistic. The Colts are still going to be looking for younger options at that position. They do like Segun Olubi quite a bit. They like Cam McGrone as a special teamer, and Grant Stewart obviously is a special teamer as well, but there is room for another guy to come in there. And this class, albeit not a great linebacker class by any means, there are a couple guys in this class that fit that Chris Ballard project linebacker type of mold where get him in here for a year, get him on special teams like they did with EJ, like they did with Zaire Franklin, like they did with Bobby Okereke's first season, get them out here for 1 year on special teams and then get them ready to go next year. So I do think linebacker is in play in this draft, and who knows, it might be earlier than what we expect. I mean, when they took Bobby Okereke back in 2019, none of us were expecting that because they had just spent 4 picks in the previous 2 drafts on linebacker. They had Anthony Walker, Matt Adams, and Zaire Franklin, and Shaquille Leonard. And, Walker and Leonard were both starters. So when they spent another pick on Bobby Okereke the next year in round 3, it seemed like a bit of a, what are you doing here? But then Walker left, and obviously they had their new guy in Okereke. So that we could see a similar type of situation here with the Colts where, obviously Speed and Franklin are going to be your starters, but they could use another linebacker in here just to prepare for that future without maybe Speed next season.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes linebacker such an obvious choice here is because they have always been a year ahead of it, at least. We saw Okereke take over for Walker. Walker took over for, I forget who his predecessor was, but that was their contingency plan there. We just see them do that over and over. And Chris Ballard has a really good hit rate on linebackers. So I think we know he's going to take one on day 3 this year. By the way, it's going to be EJ's year 29 season, which was surprising. Okay. I didn't anticipate him being that old either. So yeah, just by virtue of his age as well. So I think the Colts would be willing probably to go as early as round 3 on linebacker. I would rather they wait until day 3. Like round 4 is really the start of when I'd maybe like to see them look to add that. But what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if this were a stronger linebacker class, we could see them go as early as round 2 at linebacker, but it just isn't that kind of class. I mean, there's one guy early that does fit their mold, and that's Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. He's good run and chase linebacker, long arms, really gets after it, but he's just, he's not really going to give them anything more than what they already have. And maybe they just want a younger version of EJ Speed, and that would be perfect. You'll go grab Edgerrin Cooper, have a younger version of EJ Speed. But I think they would sit back and more so, like you said, round 3, 4, 5, around that range there, take more of a project type player and mold him into the linebacker that you want him to be. So I'm with you. I think more so outside the top 100 is where we would see them look at linebacker, but there are a couple guys I do like in that range who kind of fit the Colts. It's not as deep as most draft classes when it comes to the Chris Ballard type of linebacker, but there are a handful of guys who kind of fit that mold that we like to see from Ballard.
Yeah, I grabbed a few names here just of guys I either know about or, they've got the 9+ RAS and their measurements and athleticism just fits what the Colts look for. Generally, I mean, this is kind of like safety where there aren't many perfect fits in the whole class. But you got like Trevin Wallace from Kentucky, Jordan McGee from Temple. Our guy who is going to be our officially stamped, we sponsor this guy, day 3 Colts linebacker, Edifon Ulofosio from Washington, Jamal Hill from Oregon. The Colts have had some interest there. I think they had him for a 30 visit. Maris Leafow from Notre Dame. Aaron Casey was at the Colts local pro day, the IU linebacker. And then Dallas Gant from Toledo. With Quinyon Mitchell not working out at the pro day, Gant was him and Mason Tipton were probably the 2 best players there that performed. So there's plenty of options there on day 3.
Yeah, Edifon Ulofosio is my guy on day 3 for the Colts. He fits so much of what the Colts like at the position. He's got the arm length. He's got the athleticism. Graded out really high in coverage the last couple of years at Washington, which we need a coverage linebacker here in Indy badly. If we're gonna, if we're gonna have Zaire Franklin starting, we need a coverage linebacker next to him. I think that's the way to go. So that's a big plus for him. You look at his background. I mean, he was a former walk-on at Washington who excelled with special teams early and became more of a starter, like a full-time guy later in his career. I mean, it's just check with him when it comes to the Ballard mold. Trevin Wallace as well. I do think he's going to go a little bit higher than Ulofosio. I think he's going to go more in that like round 3 type of range. Blazing speed, physical guy. I really like what I see on film from him. And then a couple other guys that you didn't mention here that I want to throw out real quick. Brian Abraham from Albany and Daniel Abraham from Villanova. I believe they're brothers. I believe they are brothers. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'll have to check it. But Brian Abraham did more like edge, like off-ball linebacker stuff there at Albany. Was a former cornerback early in his career and can do some rush linebacker and off-ball stuff.
Interesting.
Reminds me a lot of EJ Speed coming out, just with how much he moved around. Daniel Abraham as well also moved around. I think he was the safety early in his career as well, and he moved down to linebacker. So 2 guys who kind of fit that Chris Ballard mold, who will be there like later day 3, could be good special teamers day 1. And who knows, could be those EJ Speed type of guys that you find on day 3 of the draft.
Yeah, he loves him, a small school day 3 guy who's switched positions and is a super athlete. Absolutely loves it. Other than Ulofosio, that honestly sounds like a really good match there. So coming up next, we are going to shift focus to the offensive side of the ball. the guys that will be matched up against some of these linebackers, and that is tight end. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. It's like Den of Thieves, but way less violent and way less Gerard Butler involved in it. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches in the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly that you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's just really so much to do with it. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, because you're a reckless person, even on a game. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends if you're more of a friendly person to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb that leaderboard. So get out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. And if you missed it, the Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who local Locked On experts like Zach are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft, available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Okie doke. So, tight end. Why do the Colts need this? Well, for one, this group, we know nothing about it almost. We know Kylan Granson has shown up, and we know Mo Alley-Cox has been present throughout the season as well. Jelani Woods was not. He did not get to play at all because of his hamstring issues. There was off-field stuff and injuries with Drew Ogletree. Will Mallory was a rookie. Would you like to know which two guys are free agents next year? It's the two I said were around the whole year, and that's Kylan Granson and Mo Alley-Cox. So the Colts will be without their two most reliable tight ends next year, if they don't re-sign them, of course. So you got to bank on Jelani Woods getting healthy, staying healthy, and being a capable starter, because you just saw flashes. You don't know that he is the man yet. And then Will Mallory, it's kind of the same thing. Like, Will Mallory may not be the transformer that Jelani Woods is, but he looked pretty good and could develop into a pretty good player. But you still, that neither player yet makes it so you don't try and keep finding your guy. So yeah, again, this is kicking the can down the road a little bit, but there's some guys in this draft who I think you'd be remiss not to add them despite having this current group, Zach.
Yeah, I think the really interesting thing about tight end, and don't get me wrong, we're going to mention more players than just this top guy at the at the very top of the list. But the interesting thing about this tight end room is I don't think, at least on paper right now, again, one of these guys could surprise me. It could be Mallory, it could be Woods, it could be someone else. But on paper, it's just a lot of guys who have some utility for your offense, but not really much more than that. There's not a difference maker in this room right now. Again, Jelani Woods is the ultimate wild card. We have no clue what we're going to get from him this next season. But putting him aside and putting him in his own bucket, these other guys, a lot of them are probably just utility guys that aren't going to give you that extra thing that you need. They're not going to be difference makers for your team. They can maybe do the job you need them to do, but they're not going to go past that. They're not going to be guys who really propel your offense forward. And something we've seen with the Shane Steichen offense in his 4 years as an offensive coordinator, last year was the lone season he hasn't had like a bona fide tight end one. He hasn't had that one target hog at the position who is up there like top 10, top 15 in the league in tight end receptions and tight end targets. He had Hunter Henry with the Chargers. He had Dallas Goedert and a little bit of Zach Ertz there with the Eagles. So I think he wants that element back in his offense. I think he wants one of those guys. And again, they might be higher on Jelani Woods going into this next season than most fans are right now. But I think if they see an avenue to get that upgrade right now, it doesn't matter all the other names they have on the depth chart, because you don't have a tight end one right now. You have Jelani Woods, who maybe could be that, and then a bunch of guys who are tight end twos and tight end threes. So if they see that opportunity, go get their tight end one, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Obviously, we talked about throughout this entire draft process. If they see that opportunity to get that guy who can be the Shane Steichen target hog at tight end, I think they're going to go that route. I think they're going to get that guy. But obviously, it's on how the board falls their way and stuff in round one. But I do think they want that element in Steichen's offense. They want a tight end who they can, who can kind of be their bell cow at the position. They just don't have that right now.
Yeah, it would certainly be a benefit to have. And we're obviously talking about Brock Bowers in round one. But he's really the only tight end in this class worthy of going in the first round. So that's why you're really looking towards later in the draft for it. But with him, he's absolutely an exception, and he does fit into the offense quite well. Again, I'm going to plug Zach here, just wrote a really big piece on how Brock Bowers fits into the Colts offense and Shane Steichen specifically over on horseshoehuddle.com. There's just so much you can do with him. Like, I know you already kind of have a lot of guys that eat up the middle of the field, but you don't have that at the tight end position right now. And you're kind of talking about just utility guys. Bowers has the potential to be that every down, never leaves the field tight end. The kind you see around the league, there's the few that everyone hopes they have. He has the potential to be that. And that's why there's consideration for him, not just in the top 10, but there at times you've seen him mocked at 5, you know what I mean? And some people say, other than Harrison, he's the best non-quarterback in the draft, or best non-quarterback player in the draft. But yeah, outside that, he's an obvious fit. But beyond that, and I mean, if you want to talk more about Bowers, we certainly can, but is there anyone else, starting in like day 2? Because for me, I'd be okay with round 2, round 3, you start to get some of those guys included.
Yeah, my big thing when it comes to the other tight ends in this class, and it's not an awful tight end class by any means. It's not great besides Bowers, but it's not awful. My only thing is, say you're spending like a 4th or a 5th round pick on a tight end in this class, or even like a day 2 pick, like a round 3 pick or something on a tight end in this class. Are you just going to be adding another tight end 2 or 3 to a group that already has a ton of those guys? Like Ben Sinnott from Kansas State. I think he fits this offense very well. He can do a lot of the stiffer type stuff they need. He can give you some of those yards after the catch that the Colts really didn't have last year from the position. But is he someone who really propels your offense more than the other guys you have in the room? Is he taking this group to the next level? Like, the whole point of this exercise, obviously, is to look at who is going to be free agents next year. But unlike the other positions we're mentioning, at tight end, they still have 3 guys on the roster when Granson and Allie Cox become free agents, with Ogletree, Mallory, and Woods. Again, we don't know how they're going to go this year, but it's not like it's completely barren. So for me, I'm kind of Brock Bowers or bust at tight end. I do like some of these other names that you have written down here, like Tip Ryman, AJ Barner, I think can be good blocking tight ends, which they didn't really have last year. But for me, I think it really is like Bowers or bust. Get that Yak King in here, get that guy who can eat targets and be your Dallas Clark. And then the rest of these guys can slide into their actual roles that they should have on an NFL team. They should be tight end 2s and tight end 3s. But last year they had to switch off a tight end 1 in an offense that really wasn't built for them. I mean, it's really funny. Last year, guess how many missed tackles forced the Colts tight ends had last year, all as a group? Guess how many missed tackles forced they had with the ball in their hand?
I'm going to guess you're going to say like 5.
4. They had 4 all of last year. Come on. It was only from Mo Alley Cox and Drew Ogletree, too. 0 from
That's
Granson.
Honestly, the 2 I wouldn't have expected either. Yeah. Not that Ogletree couldn't do it, but Granson is their guy.
Right. And Bowers had 18 last year for Georgia. And that was being used on that tight end screen game, that tight end like RPO game and stuff. So I think a guy like Brock Bowers, and I know I'm turning the segment into a tangent on Bowers, but he's a guy who does change the group and changes what the Colts want from that position. I think a Sinnott can do that too. I think a Jared Wiley can kind of do that too, but I don't think any of them do that to the degree that Brock Bowers does. So I would take Bowers early in this draft for the Colts. I don't know how I would feel about taking any of these other guys because I just don't know if they would bring that extra element that I need in this room compared to what we already have.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. This is certain. There's a couple positions in this draft where could they use the really good versions of them? Absolutely, but you don't want to add one just to add one. And just the exact thing you said, like you're probably adding another tight end 2 or 3, and they might even be slight upgrades over what the Colts have. But like Bowers, obviously, I really like Jatavian Sanders. I think he's a playmaker. But outside of that, I'm with you. I'm kind of looking for like a true H-back, like Ben Sinnott, or if you want that blocking tight end, that's AJ Barner's game. He's not even really a receiving tight end. Tip Ryman, he was there at the local pro day. Doesn't believe that birds are real, but that's okay. We can get past that. Like, and then there's some outliers. I think if the Colts want to take shots at the board with athletic guys, you're looking at Theo Johnson or Jared Wiley. Eric All is interesting for some people if medicals check out. But tight end, I think if I pulled my thing up, I think tight end is my smallest evaluation group this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, don't get me wrong. I'd be fine with a tight end in this class. I'm not saying it's a position group that doesn't need more bodies, but I'm kind of Brock Bowers or bust at the position. I'd be fine with one on day 3. Like, you can live with that because day 3 is just early undrafted free agency period. But I'd prefer just to keep it in-house unless you can get a guy like Brock Bowers. But coming up, we're going to talk about another position group that we have been just discussing all offseason here. That is interior offensive line. It's a really strong interior offensive line class, and the Colts have a lot of free agents coming up at that key position. So we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But first, today's show is made possible with the help of sponsors like Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if we could see all your investments and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you in financial freedom, right? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you can take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses. That's Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need in one place. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. For a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, and that's yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com.
Take a breath, King.
Okay. All right. I'll take a break. You can introduce this last segment here, Jake.
All right. Yeah. So interior offensive line, outside of special teams, probably the least sexy position group in all of football. But honestly, it's been an engine that has powered the Colts for a while now. I mean, the problem with it is Quentin Nelson is about the only one starter or depth that isn't a free agent coming up. In 2025, you got Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, Wesley French, Josh Sills, and Danny Pinter, all free agents. And that's everybody you would expect to maybe have to take a snap for the Colts on the interior, except for Quentin. You can even throw like Arlington Hambright in there as a free agent. So you're going to re-sign a couple of your own guys. Absolutely. I would imagine Kelly and Fries to come back, Wesley French. But this is a really deep group in the draft, centers and guards. You got several guys who play tackle that could turn out to be really good interior players as well. Of course, I don't think the Colts will do it early, but I think Zach and I mentioned a couple times, once you get to about round 3 or round 4, I think that's when it's time to add at least one guy that you think is capable of starting within a couple of years.
Yeah, I don't hate adding one in like round 3 even. I know you just mentioned it there, but like you have to prepare for the future. And when you are spending money like they are at wide receiver with Michael Pittman Jr., with the DeForest Buckner contract, with Zaire Franklin's contract extension about to hit in. So like a lot of these extensions that they just gave out are really going to hit big in the next year or two, which could prohibit your ability to re-sign a guy like a Ryan Kelly, who is, I believe he's a 32-year-old center who's had a lot of injury issues. I mean, he's had like 5 or 6 concussions in his career at this point. Like, the injuries are scary. The injuries are scary for any player, and especially for an older player who's getting up there in age. So I do think they need to look at the future of center. I think Will Fries has been a really solid player for them for the last 2 years, but he's kind of in that like Alec Pierce, Kwity Paye type mold where that's a good player for you. Like, don't get me wrong, very good player for you, but it's still upgradable. Like, you can still potentially get better there unless he takes that next step this next season. So you still want to be on the lookout for a potential upgrade in the future there. So I don't think it's a complete lock that those guys are both back next season. But if they're not back, you need to have some kind of contingency plan in place. I know they like Wesley French, but is it enough to be a starting center? Probably not. Danny Pinter they like as well, but they've already tried him at right guard. We don't ever need to see that again. We might see it at center again in the future, but again, like that's another position that's another guy like that. You don't know if he's going to be back. So really, when you're looking at it, like I wouldn't be opposed to, like, say you don't take an interior offensive lineman in the first 2 days, like on day 3, like just throw resources at it. Like, especially if they trade back at some point and garner more day 3 picks, like give me like 2 to 3 picks on the interior offensive line, because restock that cupboard, especially restocking a draft like this where there's, so many offensive linemen on day 3. Like, honestly, I could go off and name like 10 guys here if I wanted to when we're talking about it. There's just that many guys, I think, on day 3 that fit at both center and guard. So I think this is a perfect opportunity for the Colts to refill that cupboard there on the interior offensive line. And look, if you still like Fries and Kelly after the year, you can re-sign them, and these guys can be really cheap backups for the next couple of years. Like, you can have the best of all these worlds here. So I do think it would be in the Colts' best interest to throw some resources at interior offensive line in this draft.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot here. So you've really leaned into offensive line study in this draft cycle, especially through the Indy Draft Guide. So I didn't even list names here. But assuming they're not going to do like Jackson Powers Johnson, Graham Barton, Zach Frazier, who's got you excited after that like really good potential, but maybe needs a year or so to sit before you think they're going to be really good, which would be the ideal scenario for the Colts?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few guys. I think one guy who could be there in round 3, who I'd be very comfortable taking, is Dominic Puny from Kansas, a guy who I'm very, very high on. I think I have like a top 60 or top 70 grade on him. I had to look at the Indy Draft Guide. I had a very high grade on him, but he might fall to that like round 3 range for the Colts. Played a lot of tackle at Kansas. He projects better inside, has a little bit of Austin Corbett to his game where he can play kind of every position on the offensive line. But that's a guy who I think, if you really get him in the program for a year, he can be a really good player for you down the line. If you want to go with just a high upside start, like potential starter with really great athleticism, like a Roger Rosengarten from Washington, a guy who can play tackle or interior as well. One of the best athletes in this entire class. And again, this is more of like a round 3 type option here. At center, we could go on for days with all the centers in this class. I think this is the best center class I've evaluated personally. And I've been really in on interior offensive line for the last like 5-6 years at this point. So really, really strong center class. I think a Hunter Norzad type from Penn State is going to be there in like round 3 to round 4 range. He makes a lot of sense. I think Nick I think how you say is Gargiulio from South Carolina measured really well at in his pro days and stuff, did a lot of really good stuff on film, has some inside versatility. Tanner Bortolini, we've talked about from Wisconsin. Bo Limmer, obviously from Arkansas, we've talked about quite a bit. You can even go to the small school level. You got Jake Kubas from North Dakota State. I know the Colts like quite a bit. Lorenzo Thompson from Rhode Island, the Colts like quite a bit as a tackle and guard type. You can go to Mason McCormick, we've talked about quite a bit. Like there's a lot of guys in this draft class that fit that Colts mold, who are going to be there on like day 3, who can play guard or center, and you can just add more talent to the room. So in this type of draft class, man, I'm all about it. I'm all about it. Just throw more picks at interior offensive line, not only because I actually know these players compared to some of the other guys in this class, because I've really studied offensive line the last couple of years, but just because you're going to get a very talented class. And like this class, we've heard all offseason, it's not the deepest draft class at most positions. It's not this super deep draft class because of NIL and because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. But I really do think where the strength of this class lies is on the offensive line, especially on the interior offensive line. So if I'm the Colts, man, any of these guys, I mean, go get a Bo Limmer in round 4 and get, Lorenzo Thompson in round 7 and just let those guys battle it out in camp with the other guys you have in there. Or go get Tanner Bortolini in round 4 and then get, whoever you can get whoever there in round 6 or 7. Like, I really think there's a lot of talent the Colts can go after. Like, it's just so much on the board that I'm like overloaded with information right now trying to think about all these guys. It's that many dudes, but there's a lot of options for the Colts. I really think interior offensive line is a good play in this draft for them.
Yeah, and a couple guys I'll add into that just because they have position versatility. Now, both of these guys may be gone by the end of round 3. But Christian Haynes and Delmar Glaze, they were Senior Bowl guys. They were coached up by Colts assistant O-line coach Chris Watt down there. So, again, there's plenty to like about them. Position versatility. Haynes is more of a 3-position guy along the interior. Glaze can play tackle or guard. So wouldn't be surprised, since the Colts have a little added intel on those two. If they're there in like round 4 or something, I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled the trigger on one of them.
Yeah, so many guys. When I did my small school article, it was like 7 offensive linemen I put in there. So it's just
I'd say that the Plains states are rich with talent on the small school guys this year.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And before we get out of here, guys, I do want to remind you that the Indy Draft Guide is now here. For $9.99, you can get access to an essential piece of reading for Colts fans both before and after the draft, featuring 225 plus in-depth scouting reports, features, and much more. Click the link in the show notes to order today and read about all those names I rattled off there at the end of today's show. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.